Hello, I'm Joel Blackford with Beth Sabbath Fellowship. I'm the pastor in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I'm covering the Revelation series. This is chapter 10. Hopefully you've enjoyed all of the other videos up to this point, and you'll enjoy this one too. This one's a little bit more mystical. So some of them are more straightforward. When you've got scorpions jumping up from underneath the earth and biting you for 5 months and you don't die, you can relate to that. Well, this one's more nuanced, but I think you're going to enjoy this video, and I think you're going to enjoy the whole series. So stick with it. Obviously, you've come this far, so let's continue on. What we want to lead out with in all cases is the Olivet Discourse, because the disciples are saying, tell us, when will these things happen? And what will be the sign that you are coming? And that the Olam Hazeh, the everyday world, the world that we live in right now, where I can touch myself and I see things and whatever else, but I don't necessarily know things that I don't need to know or should know. And when is the ending? When is the marriage supper of the Lamb? So they wanted to know, and Jesus gives them an answer, and it's an interesting answer. He says, watch out, okay? Don't let anyone fool you. You will see false prophets performing great miracles, saying, I'm the Messiah. Expect to see leading many astray, hearing the noise of wars. Don't become frightened. The end is yet to come. People will fight against each other. Nations will fight against each other, and you're seeing that right now. Okay, and then famines, earthquakes, but these are just the beginning of the birth pangs. Okay, so I'm making the comparison throughout the series that the birth pangs that you would feel with literal pregnancy and birth would be similar to what's going on in the earth today. And you can say, well, you know what, Joel, my 401k is doing very, very well. I'm planning to leave for Arizona in a couple of days and relax and have a nice summer off. No, things are happening. You're just not noticing them. There are fires, there are earthquakes, there are other things going on in the world. And also, there's a weird little peace deal going on in Israel right now where Trump is going to make the deal of the century. Well, that may not be such a good deal. Okay, what I want to do consistently throughout this series is link seals to birth pangs, seals to birth pangs. So let's link it in terms of another couple of verses that are similar, they're parallel. Joel chapter 2, and Peter quotes it in Acts chapter 2. After this, I will pour out my spirit on all humanity. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your old men will dream dreams. Your young men will see visions. And also on male and female servants in those days, I will pour out my spirit. I will show wonders in the sky and on the earth, blood, fire, columns of smoke. The sun will be turned into darkness and the moon to blood. These are the birth pangs. These are important birth pangs to notice before the coming of the great and terrible day of Adonai. And once again, this is Joel chapter 2, so he quotes it in the first place, but then Peter cites it again. And this was during the time of God's Spirit being given to the disciples and to the others. Okay. What you'll also notice with us is that these birth pangs start out as the seals, but then everything seems to be linear. And so you go through the seals over time and they open, and it's like birth pangs. You know that you're going to give birth sooner or later, but then you go into the birth itself, which is those last 7 years, which is 3.5 years of the trumpets and 3.5 years of the vials. About every 4 to 6 months each seems to make sense. The other intriguing thing is if you divide the last 2,000 years, say Jesus died in, say, 30 AD and resurrected, then if you go out to 2030, that would be 2,000 years. If you divided that by 40 weeks, which is how long a pregnancy lasts, it's about every 50 years, which is a jubilee, a jubilee, a jubilee, a jubilee. It's rather intriguing. I don't know if you can spot on, say, every jubilee happens to have a mark that's like a birth pang, but you could say now as we get closer from 1867 forward, you'll see those things. And if you go back to my chapter 6 video, you'll see some of those things and some of those marks that we've hit. Then now we're in a pregnant pause, and since we're dealing with birth, whenever we talk about Revelation, we're in that pause where the contractions aren't hitting as much. There's a story going on, but God is teaching you something that's important, and he uses narrative breaks. If you study what we call the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, you will see God teaches during these narrative breaks. So he'll tell you the rule, so to speak, or the mitzvah, we would call it, which is a good thing. And then what he does is he tells you, now here's a story related to that so that you'll understand these things. Jesus calls them parables, so he tells stories too. Okay? And so he uses social, religious, legal, kingdom etiquette in the first 5 books called the Torah. Then he inserts a commentary or a story I call a narrative break, and a text relating to teaching in a Hebrew poetic form. So it's usually a poetic thought, which is a comparative thought, a parable thought. So that's why we use the word parables. They don't rhyme, like words sometimes rhyme, but it's rare. But the thoughts do. Okay? And so these narrative breaks don't necessarily fit into human timing. God is outside of time. So just look at them and say, this is what's going on. I don't know exactly when it occurs, but sometimes you can figure it out. And we'll show you that when we get to chapter 11. Right after this, you'll see it. But just keep in mind, we're in a narrative break now in this chapter through chapter 15, and then we pick up again with the bowls at that point in time. There are things going on. We'll explain what's going on behind the scenes. This would be comparable to that quiet time when Malachi's done prophesying, and all of the things that Daniel prophesied occurred very quietly from about 420 BC all the way up to Jesus' time. What we're going to deal with in Revelation 10 is the mighty angel. We don't know who the mighty angel is. He's not named. It could be Michael. And I'll make a case that it might be Michael, but either way, it's a mighty angel, very, very powerful. This is a picture of him from about 300-400 years ago, and it's intriguing. He's got fire in his legs, and he's got the winds, and he's a mighty angel. So let's describe him. So this is Revelation 10, verses 1 through 3. Next, I saw another mighty angel coming down from heaven. He was dressed in a cloud with a rainbow. It doesn't say toxon, which would be the rainbow that we normally think of, or a bow, so to speak. It says iris over his head, so it's more like a standard rainbow over his head. And his face was like that of the sun. His legs were like columns of fire. He had a little scroll. Now, I'm going to make a case today that that's a megillah, and I'll try to explain megillah to you a little bit later on. But it is definitely a little scroll, and in the Greek, it's not a biblios. It is a biblion, I'm blanking on it right now, but it's, in the Hebrew it would be a megillah, and it has more meaning to me that way. It was lying open in his hand. He planted his right foot in the sea and his left foot on the land. The right foot would be on the peoples. The sea in Judaism is the peoples, okay? And so if the peoples are agitated, the sea is agitated, okay? Then the left foot on the land, which is intriguing. But that's a way of saying, according to David Stern, the whole world. And shouted in a voice as loud as the roar of a lion. Lion is usually Judah or Jesus, so just keep that in mind. And when he shouted, 7 thunderclaps sounded with voices that spoke. I don't know what to draw from that because this is part of a secret. It's a mystery, so let's just continue on. This shows another picture of this with the little scroll and the angel. You can see the fire legs, you can see the cloud, you can see the fire involved. It's rather an intriguing picture, drawing rather. What is the little scroll, the Megillah? Let's deal with some of the books that we know about in the Bible. So there's a book of life, there's a book of death. Is there something else? A Megillah. And Megillah, when you end in a hey, which is what we do in this particular Hebrew spelling, it's a feminine noun. So it's smallish, and let's try to describe some of the other things that we know. We know what we know when we read these verses, okay? For persecuting someone you had already stricken, for adding to the pain of those you wounded, add guilt to their guilt. Don't let them enter your righteousness. Erase them from the book of life, the sefer of life, kai. Let them not be written with the righteous. Meanwhile, I am afflicted and hurting. God, let your saving power raise me up. Okay, that's from Psalm. That's the only time that we see an exact reference to the book of life. Okay, but it is a sefer in this case, not a Megillah. Okay, this is an instance where Moses talks about it, but doesn't say the sefer of life. Okay, so Moshe is pleading on behalf of the Israelites. They have sinned. They have sinned. And he's doing his best to plead with them, with God rather, to forgive them. So Moses went back to Adonai and said, please, these people have committed a terrible sin. They have made themselves a god out of gold. You know what the golden calf is. Now, if you will just forgive their sin, but if you won't, then I beg you, blot me out of your book, Sefer, which you have written. He's assuming that we're assuming that we know he's talking about the book of life. Adonai answered Moshe, those who have sinned against me are the ones I will blot out of my book. And that's Exodus 32, basically 32. Okay, so let's look for another verse that seems to match up with the same thought concept and see if the verses help us to reconcile what this book is or what this Sefer is or what this Megillah is. One of them asked the man dressed in linen, who was above the water of the river, how long will these wonders last? The man dressed in linen, angelic, who was above the water of the river, and it sounds like the land and the water a little bit, raised his right and left hands towards heaven, and swore by him who lives forever that it would be a time, a times and a half, and that it would be when the power of the holy people is no longer being shattered, that all these things will end. So Daniel's obviously talking about the end of days. This is Daniel 12, which is definitely about the end of days. But he has this angelic picture going on here of this angel in linen above the water, and it's very similar. And so is he talking about one thing or another thing? Let's continue on with Daniel. This is now 12, 9 through 13. But he said, go your way, Daniel, for these words are to remain secret. The word is like Esther, you know, from the Esther story, the Purim story. And sealed. In what? He doesn't say if a book, a sefer, a megillah, he doesn't say. Until the time of the end. Many will purify, cleanse, and refine themselves, but the wicked will keep on acting wickedly. And none of the wicked will understand, but those with discernment will understand. From the time of the regular burnt offering is taken away, and the abomination that causes desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. How blessed will be anyone who waits and arrives at the 1335 days. But you, go your way until the end comes, when you will rest and rise for your reward at the end of days. So he's talking about the marriage supper of the Lamb. He's talking about these waiting time frames. And I'm an eschatologist, and I study this all day long. I can't tell you why 1260 is listed sometimes, 1290 here, 1335. I can't tell you what it matches up with festivals or anything like that, but I can tell you that it's listed. And also, there is this concept within Daniel that information will become more accessible in the end times, and we'll understand more things. So maybe this mystery that we're dealing with right now will make more sense. But still, I can't tell you what this particular book is that Daniel is sealing and holding on to until the end. It could be that what we're dealing with in this little book, this Megillah, is what Daniel is talking about here. You never know. Okay, so now we're back to Revelation 10. Now we're going to look at some of the other verses and try to see if they harmonize with what we're talking about. When the seven thunders, voices spoke, I was about to write, but I heard a voice from heaven saying, seal up the things that seven thunders said. Notice the seal up, the same thing with Daniel. So it's very interesting, the comparisons between the two. Sealing up in books and is it the Megillah, is it a book? We don't know yet. But anyway, he says, seal up the things the seven thunders said, and do not write them down. Then the angel I saw, standing on the sea and on the land, lifted his right hand toward heaven and swore by the one who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and what is in it, earth and what isn't in it, and the sea and what is in it, there will be no more delay. This means in chapter 10 that once things get moving here, we're going to be in this interlude, but once we hit the final trumpet that we're waiting for in chapter 11, it gets fast after that. Things move very, very quickly, and certain things that have been a secret will be revealed. Okay. Let's deal with the angel that we have, that we're talking about, Michael, possibly. This big angel, this huge angel that seems to be straddling, the sea and the land. Is it Michael? It's known by Jewish people over the last 4,000 years that Michael is the angel of Israel. He's the protector. And I'll show you that in Daniel in just a moment here. So I'm saying I'm not dogmatic on this, but it is intriguing that Michael seems to be the most powerful angel. And this is a mighty angel that we're describing in chapter 10. Okay, so as we move forward here, this is Michael the great prince who champions your people. So let's look at it. When the time comes, and this is Daniel 12 again, so I've already read some of these verses to you, but when the time comes, Michael the great prince who champions your people will stand up, and there will be a time of distress unparalleled between the time they became a nation and that moment. At that time, your people will be delivered, everyone whose name is found written in the book. We don't know what book that is, but it should be the book of life. Many of those sleeping in the dust of the earth will awaken, some to everlasting life and some to everlasting shame and abhorrence. But those who can discern will shine like the brightness of heaven's dome, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, keep those words secret, seal up the book, that's safer, until the time of the end. Many will rush here and there as knowledge increases. So remember how I mentioned that as we get closer to the end of time, we see that knowledge increases and that maybe some of these secrets will be known at that point in time. But in the meantime, Daniel was told to seal it up and keep those words secret until we get close to the end. So maybe God is revealing things to some of us. Maybe through my work, he's revealing a few things to me. We'll continue on to see if he is. What does Michael do? We have to cover some of the things that Michael does, and it's mostly in Daniel. That's where we get a good glimpse of him. Okay? When Gabriel came to me, this is from chapter 10, he said, "Don't be afraid, Daniel, because since the day that you first determined to understand and humble yourself before your God, your words have been heard, and I have come because of what you said. The prince of the kingdom of Persia," this is a bad guy, okay, so there are demonic strongholds over the world, and this particular prince in Persia prevented him from coming for 21 days, but Michael, one of the chief princes, does that make him the mightiest angel? I don't know, but he is a chief prince, came to assist me so that I was no longer needed there with the kings of Persia. So I have come to make you understand what will happen to your people in the Acharith HaYomim. Okay, and so that is the end of days. Okay, and so it's a Hebrew phrase. Just think of it. There's a phrase that you might hear every now and then. I'm called an eschatologist, or I study the eschatos. That's the same basic phrase here. The eschatos is the end of days. The Acharith HaYomim is the end of days in Hebrew. Okay, and eschatos is Greek. For there is still another vision which will relate to those days. And there is another vision that will relate to this. Are we seeing that in chapter 10? Notice this is Daniel chapter 10 right here, and we're also dealing with chapter 10 of Revelation. I don't know. It's similar. What is the hidden plan of God? So we're back in Revelation. We've finished now for a moment the Daniel passages that match very similarly. But in chapter 10, verse 6b to 7, there will be no more delay. On the contrary, in the days of the sound from the seventh angel, which is coming up in chapter 11, when he sounds his tekiah. That's not a teruah, that's a tekiah. A tekiah is an ingathering, a long blast. And so if I grab my horn here, oh, there it is. So let's do the tekiah. First we'll do a teruah. That's 9 times. That would be a warning. And you would know that that's a warning because it's short blasts on the horn. A tekiah is different. It's an ingathering. So go figure that when you think things are falling apart, that the worst couldn't get any worse, suddenly he's ingathering people for almost like a festival, or something maybe like the king is being honored, or there's something going on that's good, where you would want to all get together and celebrate, like the Lamb's Feast, like the marriage supper of the Lamb. So he did the long blast on his shofar, then the hidden plan of God will be brought to completion, the good news as he proclaimed it to his servants, the prophets. So what's the good news? What is hidden, and what could be the hidden good news for that matter? Don't we already know it? The good news is Jesus lived, died, resurrected, and he's coming back again. And his words are true. Is there a hidden good news? So let's read from Mark and just see what it talks about there. Immediately the Spirit drove him out into the wilderness, and he was in the wilderness 40 days, being tempted by the adversary. He was with the wild animals. It's funny, this is a Stern's translation. Everything that I'm using pretty much is complete Jewish Bible. But he translated that as coyotes in some cases. In the King James, I think it's coyotes. It's coyote, which would be living animals. It's kai, based off that root, which is living, but they're angels. And the angels, other angels, took care of him. Okay, so Jesus has been tempted for 40 days, and he had been starving for 40 days too. And he passes the test, but Satan comes and tests him at the end with the 3 odd tests. After Yochanan had been arrested, Yeshua came to the Galilee proclaiming the good news from God. The time has come. God's kingdom is near. Turn to God from your sins and believe the good news. Is there a hidden gospel in there? Maybe. Let's think about it this way. You know the gospel. Believe in Jesus, confess your sins, repent, and accept him as your Lord and Savior. On the other hand, if you didn't really know anything about the Bible, or if you were Jewish for that matter, would you, I mean, Jesus would be a bad guy because he's done bad things to Jews over the years. Hitler claimed to be a Christian. He wasn't, but he claimed it. So keep that in mind. There is a hidden nature to some of these things about the good news, and some of the things that Jesus talked about are still kind of hidden to us. We don't always understand them. Even somebody like me, and I study this a lot, I don't always get it either. What is the hidden good news? So let's go to Romans 11 and take a peek at this. This one's an odd one because this is cultivated trees, but not using the standard rules of cultivation. So if you are cut off by what is by nature a wild olive tree and grafted, contrary to nature, into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will these natural branches be grafted back into their own olive tree? That would be the Jewish people grafted back into Jesus, so to speak. For brothers, I want you to understand this truth which God formerly concealed, but has now revealed, so that you won't imagine you know more than you actually do, which some of us do. It is that stoniness to a degree that has come upon Israel until the Gentile world enters its fullness. You'll hear me use the phrase melo hagoyim. That's the fullness of the Gentiles. And that harkens back to Genesis 48, the cross-handed blessing of Jacob over Manasseh and Ephraim. And so it's an odd blessing, but when you see the end times, you'll see something of a fullness of the Gentiles. You'll see either the gospel is proclaimed to all the Gentile world, or that the last Gentile has given his heart to Yeshua. Now, the intriguing thing is, if you go to the Muslim world right now, you will see many, many Muslims coming to Yeshua. So maybe that's part of it. We'll see. Okay, and that is the way that all of the all, Israel will be saved. So when you see the word kol in Hebrew, which is the all word here, keep in mind that doesn't mean all. That doesn't mean every single person. That means whatever God has set aside that he wants to accomplish, all of that will occur. So if he said, there are 2/3 that will be wiped out and 1/3 that comes through, that's the all of the 1/3. So he never misses his mark by even one person, but he sets aside a percentage, an amount, so to speak, and that is the all of the all. That's what kol means in Hebrew. As the Tanakh says, out of Zion will come a Redeemer. He will turn away ungodliness from Yaakov, which is Judah, which is our Jewish friends. Okay. Now we need to move back to Revelation 10 and look at the text a little bit more deeply and maybe look at this word megillah a little bit more, okay? Next, the voice which I had heard from heaven spoke to me again and said, "Go, take the scroll, lying open in the hand of the angel standing on the sea and on the land." So I went over to the angel and asked him to give me the little scroll, megillah in the Hebrew, and I'll explain that again in just a minute. And he said to me, "Take it and eat it. It will turn your stomach bitter, but in your mouth it will be sweet as honey." That sounds like Ezekiel, doesn't it? Chapter 3, Ezekiel? Okay, we'll see it again here as we move through a couple more verses in Revelation 10. I took the little scroll from the angel's hand and ate it, and in my mouth it was sweet as honey, but after I had swallowed it, my stomach turned bitter. That's Ezekiel 3. It's got to be. Then I was told, you must prophesy judgment again about many peoples, nations, languages, and kings. So if we look at Ezekiel 3, he eats a scroll like this too, a megillah in the text there. And guess what? He prophesies after that. And also, they talk about his watchman duties. So he has to be a watchman. If he doesn't watch properly, the blood can be held against him for not mentioning what he's supposed to talk about. So this is a picture of Ezekiel receiving his information, the scroll that he has to eat. And it talks about the ophanim, which are the wheels, and those are angels. And then the seraphim, I assume, they're interesting pictures, but that's a picture of Ezekiel there that somebody drew. So now let's move to Ezekiel 3, 1-3. The bittersweet scroll that he eats. He said to me, "Human being, eat what you see in front of you. Eat this scroll," megillah in the text, which is, and I'll explain megillah more in just a moment, "then go and speak to the house of Israel." So I opened my mouth, and he gave me the scroll to eat, as he said, "Human being, eat the scroll I am giving you. Fill your insides with it." When I ate it, it tasted sweet as honey. But then continuing on, "Human being," he said to me, "go to the house of Israel and speak my words to them." Prophesy, judgment. It's horrific. "For you are not being sent to a people with a difficult language." They should be able to understand him, and unintelligible speech. "But to the house of Israel, not to many peoples with difficult languages and unintelligible speech." whose words you can't understand when you hear them, without a doubt, if I had sent you to them, they would listen to you. But the house of Israel is not willing to listen to you because they aren't willing to listen to me, since all the house of Israel are obstinate and hard-hearted. Okay, so he eats the scroll and then he has to deliver this bad news. But he has to. It's a bittersweet message. It's a message of repent, and God will love you and embrace you, or don't, and judgment's coming. Bittersweet. Okay, so let's continue on to the end of chapter 3 and see what happens with Ezekiel. Then we'll talk a little bit more about this megillah. So a spirit lifted me up and took me away. I went in bitterness and the heat of my spirit. With the hand of Adonai strong on me, I went to the exiles who were living in Tel Aviv, you know where that is, by the Kavar River, and stayed with them there in a stupefied state for 7 days. And 7 is a big word in Revelation. It pops up all over the place. After 7 days, the word of Adonai came to me. And then the watchman's warning of judgment comes after these verses. So just keep that in mind. There seems to be the same thing from this mighty angel that we're seeing in chapter 10, and the megillah that John sees, and the judgment that's coming very quickly afterwards. Okay? Now we're going to describe the megillahs. So this is a book called the Chumash, and here I'll give you the front cover so you can see what it looks like. And I use this to read my Hebrew because it has my Hebrew text and my English text together. And if I go to this page, which has writing on it, don't tell my friends that I write on my scrolls. But anyway, it is something where the megillahs are listed here on the screen, and they're listed in this book, and they are the shorter books. They're little tiny scrolls. So Esther is its own little scroll related to Purim and protection from Edom, from Haman. Remember, they were going to kill off all the Israelites. Well, God protected them. And God is not listed in that book, and if you think of the word Esther, it's like hidden. God is hidden in that book, but yet he's doing all of the work. Then continuing on, Song of Songs. Oh, that's all about the Messiah returning. Now, we read it during Passover, but it's about the bride awaiting. And when I do describe this to you in one of the later videos, you're going to see where he beats up the bride for good reason, and I'll give you a good reason for why. Okay? So that's a good reason to understand that Megillah. Then Ruth. Okay, that's read at Shavuot, Pentecost, and that's when the Redeemer gives us his Spirit. And the 10 Commandments for that matter too. So it's a very important date, and Ruth is the Redeemer, the Goel Redeemer, Boaz in the Ruth story. And these are important stories. These are little tiny scrolls, but very, very big in importance. Lamentations, horrible. Tisha B'Av, so that's the 9th of Av. That's the worst day in the year when the temples both fell, and Israel has had so many disasters on those days. The Jews were kicked out of Spain on that day by Queen Isabel, which reminds me of Jezebel. And so Lamentations is a difficult scroll to eat, very bittersweet. Ecclesiastes, it's read on the 7th, 8th day of Sukkot. It's the day when Yeshua was circumcised, so it's a very important book, and it's the book of wisdom. So all of these books have meaning. They're megillah, megillot, if there are plural. And so what I want to say is, in the text of Ezekiel, it's there. I'm thinking that these little tiny messages of importance are linked to this Revelation 10 story that you're seeing. It seems to be similar for some reason. And also, there is certain information that you wouldn't notice, but because we're so far into this judgment sequence, certain knowledge should become commonplace now. You should just know that certain things are occurring. So let's compare this to what Jesus said about Jerusalem. Yes, I tell you that all of this will fall on this generation. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you kill the prophets, you stone those who are sent to you. How often have I wanted to gather your children, just like a hen gathers her chicks, under her wings, but you refused. Look, God is abandoning your house to you, leaving it desolate, and you know what happens in 62 through 70 AD. You know that they're kicked out of Jerusalem, and they've finally come back now in about the 1900s. For I tell you, from now on, you will not see me again until you say, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, which is, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So the point of all of this in chapter 10 is that it's a mystery, it's a huge angel, it's allusions to Daniel, it's allusions to this time of trouble coming up here. It's a scroll that's bittersweet, but the main thing is Yeshua's returning. He sacrificed, he willingly offered himself before the foundation of the world, and he's coming back we'll be judged, but he'll redeem us and join back closely with him, with the Father too. Just like Adam and Eve, it's about the restoration of Genesis 1:3. So we should say Baruch B'Shem, Baruch haba B'Shem Adonai. We should be thankful that even though we will have these birth pangs and these woes that are being proven throughout all of these videos, but yet he will come back and we will all say Baruch haba B'Shem Adonai. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And then we will have a meal with him, kind of like the Esther story where they have the festival at the end. And most of the festivals have that. So far we have covered the seals, the 7 seals. Remember that you have to remove all 7 seals before you can get into the Great Tribulation. And there was a pause there getting to the 7th seal. Then as we move forward, there were 4 trumpets that were dissimilar from the last 3, which are the 3 woes. But keep in mind, we're in that narrative break right now, waiting for the 7th trumpet, which is chapter 11, and we just finished chapter 10. Then we head to the 7 bowls, and it's horrific, absolutely horrific. But stay with me through this. We're going to get through this together because Yeshua is returning. It's a promise. You can keep that promise. And I'm Joel Blackford. Thank you very much for spending time with me today, and stay tuned for chapter 11. Please move on to that right away. Thank you. Good night.